1789. The most powerful monarchy in Europe faces bankruptcy. The king summons the Estates General for the first time in 175 years. Within months, the Bastille falls. Within years, the king is executed. Within a decade, a Corsican artillery officer rules France as emperor. The French Revolution is the mother of all modern political ruptures. It created our vocabulary: left and right, citizen, terrorist, reaction. It demonstrated that ancient regimes could be swept away in months. Saylor's model helps us understand not just that the revolution happened, but why it followed the trajectory it did, from reform to radicalism to terror to dictatorship. Let's trace the feedback loops through the streets of Paris. France in 1788 was not Rome. Different parameters, different initial conditions, different equilibrium. Wealth distribution W, extremely concentrated. The first estate, clergy, and second estate, nobility, owned most of the land and paid almost no taxes. The third estate, everyone else, bore the fiscal burden. But within the third estate, a wealthy bourgeoisie had emerged, rich but politically powerless. Social norms N, fracturing. The Enlightenment had undermined traditional legitimacy. Philosophes questioned divine right. Voltaire mocked the church. Rousseau imagined popular sovereignty. The old norms were eroding faster than new ones could form. Legislative position L, almost zero responsiveness. The monarchy was absolute in theory, but paralyzed in practice. Louis XVI could not tax the nobility. The parlements blocked reform. Institutional sclerosis was total. Executive power E, theoretically absolute, practically weak. The king had no independent revenue base. He depended on creditors who depended on confidence. When confidence collapsed, so did royal power. Production capacity P, stagnant. Bad harvests in 1788 caused bread prices to spike. The peasantry was desperate. The urban poor were hungry. This is not a stable equilibrium. It's a system held together by inertia, approaching bifurcation. The immediate trigger was fiscal. France was bankrupt. Wars, especially supporting American independence, had exhausted the treasury. The king needed to raise taxes, but the nobility refused to pay, and the existing tax base couldn't bear more burden. In our model, high W created a distributional conflict that the political system, with gamma near zero, could not resolve. The rich wouldn't redistribute to themselves. The poor couldn't be squeezed further. Louis XVI summoned the Estates General hoping to legitimize new taxes. Instead, he opened Pandora's box. The Third Estate demanded voting by head rather than by order. This would give them majority control. The nobility refused. The Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. The king vacillated, sometimes supporting reform, sometimes threatening force. His indecision communicated weakness. E was revealed to be hollow. In June 1789, the National Assembly took the tennis court oath, pledging not to disband until France had a constitution. The old equilibrium was finished, but what would replace it? The revolution accelerated through positive feedback loops. Each royal concession encouraged further demands. Each demand met with resistance radicalized the revolutionaries. Each act of radicalism frightened moderates and strengthened reactionaries. Each reactionary threat justified more radical measures. In July 1789, the Bastille fell. In August, the Assembly abolished feudal privileges. In October, a mob marched to Versailles and brought the royal family to Paris as virtual prisoners. N was collapsing in real time. The old norms, deference to clergy, respect for nobility, loyalty to the king, dissolved in months. But new norms hadn't stabilized. Revolutionary factions competed to define them. L was highly responsive, but unstable. The Assembly passed sweeping reforms: the Declaration of Rights, the civil constitution of the clergy, administrative reorganization. But each reform created new enemies and new conflicts. Shifted as church lands were nationalized and sold, often to bourgeois speculators. This created a constituency for the revolution, people who had bought national property and would lose it if the old regime returned. The system wasn't settling into a new equilibrium, it was oscillating wildly. By 1792, France was at war with Austria and Prussia. The revolution radicalized further. The monarchy fell. The king was executed. The Girondins, moderate Republicans, were purged by the Jacobins. The Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre, assumed dictatorial powers. The terror followed. Mass executions, ideological purification, emergency government. In our model, this is E spiking to maximum during crisis. When N has collapsed and external threats loom, executive power fills the vacuum. The committee ruled by decree, suspended normal politics, demanded total mobilization. Robespierre articulated the logic. Virtue must be enforced until it becomes habitual. The government of revolution is despotism of liberty against tyranny. Terror is the emanation of virtue. This is an attempt to forcibly raise N, to create republican norms through coercion. It failed, as such attempts usually do. You cannot guillotine your way to civic trust. By 1794, the terror consumed its own creators. Robespierre was executed. The revolution entered its Thermidorian reaction, a retreat from radicalism, a search for stability. The directory that followed Thermidor was corrupt, unpopular, and weak. It survived 5 years of coups, conspiracies, and constitutional crises. Then Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in 1799. Napoleon represents the autocratic equilibrium that emerges from revolutionary chaos. He offered order after anarchy, glory after humiliation, stability after instability. His regime preserved some revolutionary gains: legal equality, property rights, careers open to talent, while abandoning others, representative government, civil liberties, limits on executive power. In our model, Napoleon found a new equilibrium: high E, moderate W, the bourgeoisie kept their property; new N, built around nationalism and military glory; L, suppressed, but not zero. This equilibrium was stable enough to dominate Europe for 15 years. It took a coalition of all the great powers to bring it down, and even after Waterloo, France cycled through monarchies, republics, and empires for another century before stabilizing as a democracy. The revolution's trajectory, from reform to radicalism to terror to dictatorship, is a pattern we see repeated. It's what happens when parameter drift has made the old equilibrium impossible, but the new equilibrium hasn't yet formed. What does Saylor's model illuminate about the French Revolution? First, fiscal crisis as trigger. When gamma is near zero, distributional conflicts accumulate without resolution. Eventually, the pressure finds a release, often through some proximate shock like bankruptcy. Second, the instability of transitions. The revolution didn't move smoothly from monarchy to republic. It oscillated wildly. This matches the model's prediction for systems between equilibria, high variance, sensitivity to small perturbations, unpredictable trajectories. Third, terror as emergency regime. When N collapses and threats mount, systems often spike E to maximum. The terror was extreme, but not anomalous. Revolutionary emergencies often produce emergency dictatorships. Fourth, the autocratic attractor. Napoleon wasn't an accident. He was the basin the system fell into. When you destroy one equilibrium without establishing another, you often get strongman rule. Fifth, path dependence. The revolution's specific trajectory depended on contingencies. Which factions won which struggles, which generals proved competent, which leaders were executed. The model predicts the general shape: bifurcation, instability, new equilibrium, not the specific path. Rome and France, two transitions, same framework. Both started with unsustainable W and declining N. Both had political systems that couldn't process distributional conflict, low gamma. Both experienced accelerating instability as parameters drifted past critical values. But the specifics differed. Rome's transition took a century, France's took a decade. Rome's driver was conquest wealth, France's was fiscal bankruptcy. Rome's new equilibrium was military empire. France's was nationalist dictatorship before eventual democracy. The model captures the common dynamics, the feedback loops, the bifurcations, the equilibrium transitions, while allowing for different parameters to produce different trajectories. This is the power of mathematical modeling. We don't claim Rome and France were identical. We claim they were instances of the same underlying dynamics, parameterized differently. The same lens reveals similar patterns in different historical lights. The French Revolution transformed the world. It proved that traditional regimes could be overthrown, that societies could be remade, that history had a direction. It also showed the costs, the terror, the wars, the millions dead, the decades of instability. Saylor's model helps us see the revolution not as a morality play, heroes and villains, good intentions gone wrong, but as a dynamical system. The parameters made the old equilibrium impossible. The transition was inherently unstable. A new equilibrium eventually emerged. Next episode, we'll bring the model forward to the present. What do contemporary democracies look like through this lens? What are the parameters? Where are the stresses? Are we approaching a bifurcation? The past illuminates the present. That's why we study history. Next time, modern democratic capitalism.